The first time they saw him, he was walking through fire. No armor. No rifle. Just a white medic's coat scorched at the edges and a satchel clinking with vials and syringes. Around him, the mud boiled under plasma bursts, and the air reeked of ozone and blood. Yet he walked like he'd forgotten fear existed, like explosions were just background noise to his workday. Corporal Enrix of the Thal Coalition blinked his two nictitating membranes in disbelief. "That's your healer?" he rasped over the comms. His voice trembled with the mixture of exhaustion and awe that came only after 36 hours of fighting. The human turned slightly, visor reflecting green flame. "Name's Lieutenant Calder," he said simply. His tone carried no bravado, just a quiet, clinical calm that didn't belong on a battlefield littered with dying soldiers. Then he knelt beside a groaning Thal infantryman whose blue blood steamed from a cauterized wound. "Hold still," Calder murmured, as if speaking to a patient in a hospital, not someone on a burning wasteland. "You're going to feel a sting." The Thal screamed when the injector hissed. Then screamed louder when the flesh around the wound started knitting together like fast-forwarded footage of nature reclaiming a corpse. Within seconds, the bleeding stopped. The pain didn't. "Wah, what did you?" the Thal gasped. Calder's visor caught the reflection of another incoming plasma bolt. Without looking, he yanked the Thal soldier backward, letting the bolt sear the dirt where his patient had been. "Temporary stabilizer. You'll live." "Probably." He rose again, turning toward the next cry of agony. Enrix could only stare. The human's hands moved with terrifying precision. Each injection, each seal of flesh, each calm instruction, it was mechanical, perfect, cold. No hesitation, no panic. And no mercy for the dying. The Thal had been told that humans were fragile. Empathic. Too emotional to handle true war. But this healer, looked like he'd studied death, memorized it, and decided to perform surgery on it. When the bombardment finally eased, Enrix stumbled over corpses to where the human was cleaning his tools in the blood-slick mud. "Lieutenant Calder," he croaked. You saved 30 of my unit." Calder didn't look up. 34, he corrected softly. "Counting the ones who aren't screaming anymore." Enrix hesitated. Those ones are dead." "Not yet." Calder's hand didn't pause in wiping down a needle. "They're chemically suspended. You'll want to get them in cryo within an hour." Enrix blinked all four eyes. "Suspended? You mean you?" "Shut up and fetch the cryopods." Calder finally looked up. Or all that screaming was for nothing. That was the first time anyone on Urix 9 realized why Command had attached a human medic to the Thal division. They hadn't sent him to heal the wounded. They'd sent him to defy death itself, and to stare down the impossible until it blinked first. Urix 9 was supposed to be a simple reclamation world. Low oxygen, mild toxicity, and a few scattered scar nests, nasty insect things that fought like demons but broke easily under sustained bombardment. Then the nests multiplied, the atmosphere destabilized, and the ground cracked open into bioluminescent caverns filled with hives the size of cities. When the Thal 82nd Regiment landed, they lost 30% of their forces in the first 3 days. By day 6, morale had evaporated. The Scar weren't fighting for territory, they were fighting for consumption. Every corpse left behind was stripped to bone in minutes, reprocessed into new larvae. Every wound risked infection by chitin spores that turned blood into jelly. Every soldier knew that getting hit meant being devoured from the inside out. That was when the human arrived. Lieutenant Calder, Federation Combat Medic, Sector 9 Division. Medical specialization, biochemistry and trauma response. Decorations classified. Psychological evaluation, unstable but effective. The Thal quartermaster had laughed when he saw the human's file. Unstable but effective? They're sending us a psychopath in a white coat. 3 hours later, no one was laughing. Calder's camp was a blend of surgery ward and abattoir. His tent reeked of antiseptic, ozone, and something darker, burned flesh, melted armor, and the cold metallic tang of blood. Instruments lined the walls like surgical weapons. A bone saw hung beside a tray of nanite injectors. And 4 drip fed into a soldier's arm, the liquid glowing faintly blue. Enrix entered hesitantly. You wanted to see me, Lieutenant? Close the flap. Calder didn't look up from the patient on the table, another thal, twitching under sedation. The human's hands were slick with dark ichor, his sleeves rolled up past his elbows. His arms were tattooed in lines of old service records and coordinates, battlefields, dates, names. But one tattoo stood out more than the rest, a black caduceus wrapped around a skull. The universal symbol for medics. Except the skull was grinning. I need a runner, Calder said quietly. Someone who can move between platoons without vomiting at the smell of plasma rot. Enrix swallowed. You're making something new? Calder's lips curved in the ghost of a smile. Clever of you to notice. I'm modifying a nanite formula. The scar use an acid secretion to break down organic tissue. I'm countering it. How? By making something worse. He injected a vial into the patient's bloodstream. The thal on the table convulsed, eyes snapping open as veins turned black and then, slowly, faded back to blue. Calder watched a monitor spike, then stabilize. Good. He'll survive. If the nanites don't eat him first. Enrix flinched. You're experimenting on soldiers? I'm saving them, Calder said sharply. Then, softer. Every formula costs lives before it saves them. That's medicine. Or haven't your people learned that yet? There was no arrogance in his tone, just a terrible certainty. It silenced any argument. Enrix only nodded, though a chill crept down his spine. Outside, thunder rumbled, not from the sky, but from orbital bombardments. The ground shook as the scar launched another wave. Calder didn't even glance toward the noise. They'll be here soon, Enrix warned. I know, Calder said, snapping his kit closed. That's why I'm going out. You what? You can't. You're unarmed. Calder strapped on his field harness, checking each injector and blade like a soldier checking ammunition. I'm armed enough. He stepped into the night. The battle that followed should have been remembered for the heroism of the Thal infantry, or the desperation of their last stand at Ridgepoint. Instead, every surviving Thal remembered only the human. They said he moved through the storm like a ghost, appearing where soldiers fell, dragging them back from the brink, muttering half-prayers and chemical formulas in the same breath. When plasma fire turned trenches into rivers of burning mud, he dove into them to pull screaming troopers free. When the scar broke through, he jammed injectors into his own veins, keeping himself awake and alive long after his body should have collapsed. At one point, Enrix saw him standing atop a mound of scar corpses, covered in blue and black blood, his medical satchel empty. He was breathing hard, but his eyes gleamed behind the visor. Where's your weapon? Enrix had yelled, firing into the swarm beside him. Calder had smiled. You're looking at it. Then he reached down, pulled a scar stinger from a corpse, and used it as a scalpel to cut open another wounded Thal, right there, on the battlefield, under fire. The procedure was brutal, efficient, and utterly without fear. By the time the reinforcements arrived, there was a rumor spreading among the ranks. They said the human medic didn't heal the dying, he traded something with them. They said the scar avoided him now, steering clear like predators sensing another predator. When the command report came in, the human's name was listed under Medical Officer Detached. But among the soldiers, a new call sign began to circulate, whispered with the same reverence and dread once reserved for death itself. Reaper. Later that night, when the wounded were stacked in cryo and the survivors too numb to speak, Enrix found Calder sitting outside his tent, staring at the stars through the haze of burning metal. The human's uniform was soaked with blood, none of it his own. His gloves were shredded, his eyes hollow. But there was something almost peaceful in the way he breathed. You should rest, Enrix said softly. You've done more than any healer I've ever seen. Calder didn't answer for a long time. Finally, he said, You know what they called me before this war? Enrix shook his head. Doctor. Calder smiled faintly, though there was no joy in it. Funny, isn't it? Same job. Different meaning. Enrix hesitated. You saved us. I patched holes in meat, Calder said. You saved yourselves? The Thal looked at him, confused. Then why do it? Why walk into fire for strangers? Calder's gaze lingered on the horizon where the next hive burned. Because death hates being mocked. And someone has to keep it angry. The night wind stirred, carrying the smell of smoke and antiseptic. Enrix realized then that he wasn't looking at a healer or a killer. He was looking at someone who had become both, someone who had stared into the abyss of war and decided to bring his own kind of mercy. A terrible, necessary mercy. When the order came for the next push, Calder stood first. His coat was still white, though stained beyond recognition. The medic insignia on his chest gleamed faintly in the firelight. And for the first time, Enrix noticed the small inscription stitched beneath it, words so old, no one remembered their origin anymore. First, do no harm. He looked up at the horizon where the next battle waited, smiled bitterly, and whispered, Guess I broke that one. Then he marched toward the sound of screams. They found him in the ash fields 3 days later, alive, awake, and surrounded by corpses. The Thal recovery teams hesitated to enter the blast zone at first. Radiation readings spiked off their sensors. The Scar hives had detonated something, bioreactive, corrosive, unlike anything seen before. The ground bubbled where bodies lay, melting into a dark soup. And right in the center of it all stood Calder. His coat was gone. His faceplate cracked. But his hands, steady as ever, were stitching flesh under the glow of a broken plasma lamp. By the stars, whispered Enrix, as he stepped closer, rifle trembling. He's still working. Calder didn't look up. Keep your respirator sealed. You breathe this air, you'll die in minutes. Enrix's translator clicked nervously. How are you breathing it? I'm not sure I am, Calder muttered, finally setting his instruments aside. He tapped the side of his neck where a thin line of surgical seals ran beneath his skin. Nanite filtration system. Improvised. Probably killing me slowly. But slower than the air would have. He reached down, injected something into the limp Thal soldier at his feet. The body twitched, then took a breath. Enrix froze. That one's been dead for hours. Calder leaned back on his heels, voice hoarse. Then he's late to the funeral. He rose, staggering slightly. The blood on his gloves had long since dried into black scales. His left arm trembled, fingers jerking as if something inside was malfunctioning. But when he met Enrix's gaze, his eyes were sharp, bright, focused, and unflinchingly human. Get your command online, he said. The Scar are adapting. Command didn't want to believe it. The Thal High Marshal, communicating from orbit, dismissed Calder's report as human paranoia. Adaptation cycles in Scar biology take weeks. We've only been groundside for 12 days. Calder didn't flinch. Then you're going to have a very short war. The Marshal's tendrils flared in irritation. You overstep your station, medic. Calder's voice remained calm. You misunderstand my rank. I'm not here for your station. I'm here for your survival. The Thal officer cut the transmission, fuming. Enrix waited until the channel died before speaking. They don't listen. They never do, Calder replied, reassembling a rifle that clearly wasn't standard issue for medics. It was a modified plasma carbine, its firing core replaced with a stabilizer injector. Each round would deliver not heat, but chemical disruption. They didn't listen on Salus 4 either. Lost half a continent because someone thought the enemy wouldn't evolve. Enrix's eyes flicked to the weapon. You're arming yourself? Calder locked the rifle's chamber with a hiss. Not for killing. Then for what? For surgery, Calder said quietly. On a planetary scale. By the time night fell, the Scar had changed. The first wave came silently, no shrieking, no pheromone howls. Just the low clicking sound of mandibles cutting through air. Their armor was thicker now, iridescent and flexible, deflecting plasma rounds like glass beads. Their bodies glowed faintly in the dark, lines of bioluminescent fluid pulsing under the shell like veins of molten light. When they hit the perimeter, the Thal line broke in under 2 minutes. Calder was in the forward trench when the first breach came. He didn't run for cover. He didn't even draw his sidearm. Instead, he slammed a syringe into his own leg, teeth clenched as the serum burned through his veins. His body jerked once, then stilled. The world slowed. Every movement became crystal sharp. The nanite compound, an unstable mix of adrenaline regulators and Neuralink amplifiers, was designed to keep a medic functional in chaos. Calder had refined it far beyond that. Now it tuned his mind like a blade, sharpening every heartbeat into calculation. He moved through the trench like a surgeon through an operating room. One hand pulled a wounded Thal out of the line of fire, the other tossed a capsule that erupted in a burst of white mist, an aerosolized coagulator that instantly sealed open wounds. A scar lunged out of the haze. Calder turned, caught its forelimb, and jammed an injector into the exposed joint. The creature screamed, convulsed, and collapsed as its own bloodstream crystallized. "Keep firing!" he shouted to the soldiers. "And for Void's sake, breathe shallow. Their spores are airborne now." Enric stumbled beside him, coughing. "You can't fight and heal at the same time." "I'm not fighting," Calder said, reloading his injectors. "I'm disinfecting." The battle turned feral. The scar poured over the trenches like a living tide. The night sky burned red with plasma arcs and the blue-white glare of detonation flares. Calder became something else in that chaos. Not man, not monster, something colder. Efficient. He patched arteries with one hand while severing scar limbs with the other. When ammunition ran dry, he scavenged their acidic blood, converting it into sterilizing firebombs. The Thal began whispering it over calms again. The name that had started as a joke, a grim bit of gallows humor. Reapers still standing. The Reapers cutting through them. The Reapers on the left flank, follow him. Calder ignored it all. He didn't care for the name. But he did care that every soldier who shouted it kept fighting a little longer, because believing a human could outstare death gave them just enough courage to survive the next minute. By dawn, the scar retreated. The trenches held, but barely. Hundreds of Thal lay wounded, their armor dissolved by corrosive mucus. The survivors coughed blood and spores. The medics who hadn't died were overwhelmed. Calder walked among them like a phantom, marking each patient with a glowing seal from his kit. Red for critical. Yellow for salvageable. Blue for lost causes. Enric watched as he knelt beside a soldier whose entire lower body had been liquefied by acid. The Thal was conscious, gasping, reaching for Calder's sleeve. "Please, please!" Calder met his eyes. "I'm sorry." He pressed a vial to the Thal's neck. The soldier exhaled once, softly, and then went still. The monitor went flatline. Enric's voice shook. "What did you give him?" "Peace," Calder said. Enric looked at the blue seal still glowing on the corpse's armor. He could have." "No," Calder said. His voice was quiet, tired, unyielding. "He couldn't." He rose, turning toward the horizon where smoke still drifted. "I can't save everyone. But I can make sure death has a schedule." Later, when command finally called down reinforcements, they found Calder in the ruins of the field hospital. He was bent over a table, charting something in the dirt with a scalpel. "What is this?" the marshal demanded, lowering his respirator mask. "Where are the wounded?" Calder didn't look up. "Quarantined." The marshal blinked. "Quarantined? In whose authority?" "In mine," Calder said. "You'll thank me when you're not vomiting blood." The marshal's tendrils flared. "You overstep again, human. You're a healer, not a commander." Calder finally looked up. His eyes were bloodshot, his expression blank. "I'm a medic. I contain infection. Whether that infection is viral or bureaucratic doesn't make a difference to me." The Thal guards raised their rifles. Calder didn't move. "If you break quarantine, you'll spread the spores across the sector. You won't just lose Urix 9. You'll lose every ship that lands here." The marshal hesitated. He could see the calm certainty in the human's gaze, the same certainty that had turned battles. And what do you propose, Reaper? Calder frowned faintly at the nickname but didn't argue. Burn the nests. Salt the soil. No prisoners, no samples. And move the living to high ground before the rain hits. The marshal stared. The rain? Calder pointed toward the clouds forming above the horizon, dark, greenish, alive with faint sparks of bioluminescence. It's not water. The first drops fell within the hour. They hissed on contact with armor, eating through composite plating like acid. The scar had seeded the clouds, turning the weather itself into a weapon. Entire trenches filled with boiling sludge as soldiers screamed and scrambled for cover. Calder didn't run. He pulled the filtration mask tighter, raised his communicator, and barked orders. Get the wounded under shields. Use every tarp, every scrap of metal you can find. Enrix watched him through the downpour. The human moved like a machine, voice cutting through the chaos with calm precision. But the acid burned his exposed skin. Steam rose from his gloves. His coat caught fire, but he didn't stop. When Enrix tried to drag him to shelter, Calder shook free. Get back in the bunker! You'll die out here! Enrix shouted over the roar of acid rain. Calder turned, face half hidden by the cracked visor. Then I'll make it count! He raised a small sphere from his belt, a beacon, glowing faint red, and hurled it into the heart of the storm. It detonated in silence, releasing a pulse of white light that spread across the clouds like ripples in water. For a moment, the rain slowed. The chemical reaction was neutralized locally, temporary, fragile, but enough to buy them minutes. How did you? Enrix began. Calder's voice was raw. Modified dispersal nanites. They're eating the acid faster than it can replicate. But they won't last. The Thal officer stared at him, realization dawning. You made a cure out of a plague. Calder gave a faint, humorless smile. That's how medicine works. You fight poison with poison. When the storm passed, the field was unrecognizable. The trenches had melted into black pits. The air shimmered with toxin. And at the center of it all, Calder sat alone, helmet off, rain still sizzling off his hair. His hands were shaking uncontrollably now, the price of too many nanite injections. His body was losing cohesion, cells rebelling against the foreign machines inside. Enrix approached slowly. You saved hundreds. Calder didn't answer for a moment. He just stared at his trembling hand. No, he said finally. I delayed hundreds of deaths. There's a difference. Enrix knelt beside him. You can't keep this up. Calder looked at the rising smoke in the distance, the faint green glow of the next hive cluster pulsing on the horizon. You're right. He rose, wincing as his leg gave way, then steadied himself. That's why I'm not stopping. He began walking toward the glow. Where are you going? Enrix called after him. To end the infection, Calder said. And if you don't come back? Calder paused, turned slightly, and smiled. A small, tired smile that didn't reach his eyes. Then tell them the Reaper found something worth saving. He vanished into the haze as the thunder of scar hives rolled again across the poison plains. They found the first signs of him 2 kilometers from the hive front. A trail of burned chitin led into the canyons, a path carved not by explosives, but by something far cleaner, surgical almost. The scar bodies were sliced open with precision. Their acid glands had been removed, their neural sacs cauterized, their thoraxes filled with crystalline residue that pulsed faintly blue. When the Thal recon drone transmitted images back to command, the operator swore softly. He's harvesting them. Enrix leaned closer to the screen, mandibles flexing uneasily. No, he's curing something. The marshal scoffed over comms. Nonsense. The human's gone mad. You said yourself his body was breaking down. Enrix's voice was tight. Yes. But if he's still moving, that means he's still thinking. And that's what you should be afraid of. Deep in the canyon, Calder's world had shrunk to the rhythm of his pulse. Step. Breathe. Inject. Stitch. Repeat. His vision flickered between clarity and static. The nanites inside him were burning out, some obeying, others rebelling. He could feel them crawling beneath his skin, rewriting his biology one cell at a time. He didn't care. The samples he'd taken from the dead scar were responding to his treatment. The crystalline residue was spreading, parasitic yet stable. It was a mutagenic inhibitor, a way to block the scar's endless adaptive cycles. If he could synthesize enough of it and distribute it across the hive network, he could shut down their evolution entirely. A cure of sorts. Or a weapon. He wasn't sure which anymore. The wind howled through the canyon, carrying echoes of distant movement. Calder paused, scanning the shadows. The scar hive pulsed ahead, massive, organic, alive. The walls of it glowed with rhythmic bioluminescence, like the heartbeat of some planetary beast. He gripped his rifle, not for defense, but for stability, and limped onward. He breached the hive at dawn. The entrance was a yawning pit of light, rimmed with dripping resin and vibrating with the hum of thousands of wings. The air was thick with spores, glittering like golden dust in the pale glow. Calder's respirator was long gone, but the nanites filtered what they could. Inside, the structure twisted and spiraled like arteries. The walls pulsed, secreting fluids that smelled of iron and ozone. He walked through it all in silence, following the vibration, the central heartbeat. At the heart of the hive, he found it, a vast chamber filled with the scar's living core. It wasn't a queen, not exactly. The scar had evolved beyond hierarchy. This was something more, a neural engine, a pulsating mass of bioelectric tendrils connecting every creature across the network. It was how they adapted, how they learned, how they shared evolution in real time. If he could reach that core, he could end them. Calder took out a case from his satchel, opened it carefully. Inside were 5 vials of glowing blue liquid, the inhibitor serum he'd crafted from scar tissue and his own blood. The mix was unstable, volatile, and utterly untested. He didn't hesitate. He pressed the first vial into the organic floor, then another. The core pulsed faster, reacting instinctively. The hive's walls trembled. Then came the first scream. Not human. Not even physical. It reverberated through his skull like static. The scar network was aware of him now. They came pouring in through the tunnels, thousands of them, crawling, flying, screeching. A tidal wave of chitin and claws. Calder grabbed his rifle, fired bursts of chemical rounds into the first wave. Each shot released clouds of destabilizing nanites that clung to their armor, eating through the carapace. The creatures shrieked and melted into ash. He switched to his injectors, throwing them like darts. Each impact spread more blue mist, infecting the hive air. The serum began reacting with the neural core, turning the chamber's glow from green to pale azure. Still, they kept coming. Calder fought until the rifle overheated, then used it as a club. His left arm went numb. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. His vision fractured into shards of light. "Come on!" he growled through gritted teeth, slamming another vial into the wall. "You like evolution? Try this!" The hive convulsed. The light turned blinding white. The scar around him spasmed, their bodies splitting open as crystal veins grew through their exoskeletons. And then the hive screamed again. This time, it sounded almost human. Above ground, the Thal units were just beginning to regroup when the seismic readings spiked. The ground heaved, and a shockwave of blue light burst from the canyons. The sky turned the color of shattered glass. Enric stumbled, staring at the horizon. "What in the void was that?" A comms officer's voice crackled through. "Energy surge from the hive region. Biological signal collapse across all scar frequencies." The marshal turned sharply toward Enrix. "Your human did what?" Enrix's eyes were wide, unfocused. He killed the network." "Impossible," the marshal barked. Enrix looked back at the glowing horizon. "Then tell me why it's bleeding light." Inside the collapsing hive, Calder staggered toward the core. It was dying, splitting open in cracks of crystal light. The serum was spreading faster than he'd calculated, rewriting every cell in the network. The scar's adaptive code was unraveling. He should have run. He should have saved himself. Instead, he took one last injector from his belt and drove it into his own chest. His vision exploded with white fire. The nanite surged, connecting him to the network. For an instant, he could feel everything. Every dying scar. Every nerve. Every fragment of instinct that had ever driven them. And beneath it all, a presence. Ancient. Cold. Curious. Human. The word wasn't spoken. It was pressed directly into his mind. Calder froze. You can speak? We can remember. What are you? The beginning. The pattern. We were healers once, too. Calder's heart pounded. Images flickered in his mind, alien worlds, oceans of spores, creatures reshaping their forms to survive extinction. Evolution weaponized. Survival made religion. You infected yourselves, he whispered. We adapted. And destroyed everything else. That is what adaptation means. Calder's hands shook. The serum was fusing with his bloodstream, turning his veins luminous. Not anymore. He reached into the pulsing core, forcing the last of the inhibitor into its heart. The voice screamed, not in pain, but in fury. You cannot kill the pattern. I'm not killing it, Calder said, voice breaking. I'm teaching it mercy. The chamber erupted. When the blast wave reached the Thal base, every instrument shorted out. The sky lit up like sunrise. For a heartbeat, every creature on Urix 9 went silent. Then nothing. Just the wind. When the storm cleared, the canyons were gone. In their place was a crater of fused glass, glittering faint blue under the dawn light. No scar signals. No hive activity. Just silence. Enrix led the recovery teams down into the crater. They found fragments of armor, melted equipment, and ash. No bodies. At the center of the crater, something shimmered, half buried in crystal. It was a helmet. Human. The visor cracked. The insignia still faintly visible, the caduceus and skull. Beneath it, an imprint in the glass, shaped like a man kneeling. Enrix stared for a long time. The Thal soldiers behind him said nothing. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The marshal's voice came through the comms, tight with disbelief. Is he dead? Enrix looked down at the imprint, at the faint blue pulse still glowing beneath the surface, like a heartbeat waiting for permission to rise. He smiled faintly. If he is, the planet hasn't figured that out yet. Weeks passed. The Thal scientists studied the crater obsessively. The blue crystal was inert but oddly warm. Its structure contained biological code, half Thal, half scar, and something unmistakably human. The researchers couldn't replicate it. They couldn't even analyze it properly. Every time they drilled a sample, the crystal healed itself. The soldiers called it the Reaper's Scar. A memorial grew around it, helmets, insignias, medical tags from those who'd survived. No one dared to touch the center. One night, Enrix stood at the edge of the scar, looking down at the faint glow beneath the surface. The stars reflected in his eyes. Do you hear them? Came a voice behind him. Enrix turned. It was the Thal chaplain. Hear who? The humans, the chaplain said softly. They say he was no medic. They say he was an avatar of their old myths. A man who took sickness into himself so others could live. A healer who died and rose again. Enrix looked back at the glow. He was just a man. The chaplain tilted his head. Maybe that's why it worked. Far beneath the crystal surface, something stirred. Not movement, more like thought. A pulse of memory, a flicker of consciousness suspended between death and dream. Calder floated in the dark. He could feel the network still whispering at the edge of his mind. But the scar voice was gone, silenced, overwritten. In its place was quiet. He reached for his own heartbeat and found two. One his. One shared. He smiled weakly in the dark. Guess we're roommates now. A faint echo answered, not words, just approval. He drifted, either alive nor dead, while the world above healed. And as the first flowers began to bloom across the Reaper's Scar, their petals shimmered faintly blue, the color of the serum that had ended a species and saved another. Enrix returned one last time before leaving the planet. He knelt, pressing a hand against the glass. "Goodbye, human," he murmured. "You were a healer after all." The glow beneath his palm pulsed once, like acknowledgement. He smiled. "Rest easy, Reaper. Your patients are going to live." He turned, walking back toward the waiting dropship. Behind him, the crater shimmered in the light of the twin suns. For just a moment, the reflection on its surface looked like a figure standing tall again, coat flaring, head bowed, hands steady. Then the wind shifted, and the image faded into light. The med drones circled overhead like tired angels, their searchlights sweeping through drifting ash and smoke. In the broken silence after the orbital strike, there was only the whine of damaged servos, the crackle of settling debris, and a slow, uneven heartbeat, belonging to the man everyone now called the Reaper. Jalen lay half buried under the rubble of what had once been the triage dome. His armor was shredded, his visor cracked open, his breath shallow. The med scanner in his wrist blinked faintly, screaming warnings he ignored. The medic patch on his chest, once bright white, was now blackened, scorched into illegibility. Only the faint imprint of the caduceus symbol glowed beneath the soot. He blinked through the haze, hearing faint voices above the static in his calm. "Command to Unit Delta, status report. Anyone alive down there?" He coughed, spat dust, and hit the transmit key. "Delta medic here," he rasped. "Casualties, all around. I'll get to them." "Jalen," a voice broke in, cracking with relief. It was Captain Rowe. "You're alive. Stay put, extraction inbound." He laughed, a dry, broken sound. "Negative, Captain. Still got work to do." He began to crawl, dragging himself toward a pile of twisted bodies. Most were unrecognizable beneath melted armor, but the heat sensors in his HUD still flickered, tiny sparks of life. The Reaper refused to leave a spark to fade. By the time the first rescue team descended from orbit, they found him kneeling amid the corpses, using his own foreline to transfuse blood into a dying alien marine whose biology was barely compatible. His arm trembled violently. The transfusion pump beeped a red warning, signaling his own blood pressure collapse. "Medic! Stop! You'll kill yourself!" one of the Terran responders shouted. Jalen didn't answer. His hands were steady even as his vision dimmed. "She's stable," he murmured, sealing the wound. "Stabilize the others. Don't touch me yet," a junior officer whispered, horrified and awestruck. "He's been working like this for hours." Another nodded. "Days, maybe. Look, half the wounds on him are self-sealed. No anesthetic." When the alien marine stirred, blinking with recognition and fear, she looked at him the way soldiers once looked at gods. You're the Reaper," she said weakly. Jalen shook his head. "Healer," he corrected softly. "Always was." But when he stood, bleeding, trembling, limping toward the next pile of fallen, everyone around him stepped back, parting like a tide before a myth. Hours later, in the med bay aboard the orbital cruiser Kestrel, Jalen lay on a cot, his vitals stabilized, IVs snaking into his veins like roots of glass. The ship's AI flickered beside his bed, projecting a calm female form. "Lieutenant Jalen Ward," it said. "You are listed as Kia in the last 47 after-action reports. Shall I correct the record?" Jalen's lips twitched. "Leave it." "Why?" "Because the dead don't get reassigned." He rolled to his side, ignoring the AI's attempts to sedate him, eyes flicking toward the observation window. Below, the planet burned in faint lines of fire where orbital strikes had scarred the surface. The evacuation had succeeded, but the cost, billions dead, cities vaporized, hung over the survivors like a permanent eclipse. The door hissed open. Captain Rowe entered, his uniform immaculate despite the faint scorch marks near the hem. His face, however, looked 10 years older. "They're saying you turned the tide," Rose said quietly. "Command's already circulating the footage. The medic who walked through plasma fire to save both sides. The Reaper of Helion." They're calling it a miracle. Jalen didn't look away from the window. You know what it was? Yes, Ro admitted. Desperation. Madness. And maybe, humanity. Rose set a small black case on the table beside Jalen's cot. Inside, neatly folded, was a new uniform, crisp, untouched, with a fresh insignia. Commands transferring you to Earth. Medal of Honor. Ceremonies, interviews, the works. Jalen stared at it for a long moment. You know I can't wear that. Rose sighed. Then what will you wear, Lieutenant? Jalen looked down at his burned fatigues, the faint letters still visible beneath the soot, medic. This, he said simply. The galaxy doesn't need another hero. It needs a healer. But the galaxy rarely listened. By the time they reached Earth orbit, half the system already knew his story. Media fleets shadowed their arrival. Drones hovered like fireflies over the landing platform, broadcasting every detail, the ragged uniform, the bandaged hands, the haunted eyes. Children waved from the crowds, clutching makeshift banners, the Reaper saves. He hated the name. Reporters swarmed the moment he stepped off the ramp. Lieutenant Ward! How does it feel to be the hero of Helion? Is it true you saved enemy soldiers? What do you think of the peace talks? Are the rumors true, that you can't sleep anymore? He pushed through them in silence, heading for the hospital instead of the ceremony hall. The halls of St. Florence Medical were quiet, sterile, peaceful. No explosions. No screams. Just the hum of machines and the slow rhythm of recovery. He walked among the wounded, human, alien, hybrid, and in each face he saw the same confusion, the same question behind their eyes. Why? A small alien child reached out from her bed as he passed, her green skin bandaged, her eyes wide. You're the Reaper, she whispered. He paused, crouched beside her bed, and smiled faintly. The Reaper's gone, he said. Just a medic now. Are you gonna make everyone better? She asked. He thought for a long moment before answering. I'll try. That night, the ghosts came again. They always did. Jalen sat on the hospital rooftop, the city lights stretching below like constellations, his pulse gun disassembled beside him, a relic now, its power cell drained. He traced the etched letters on the weapon's frame, the custom engraving every field medic carried, first to bleed, last to die. He looked up at the stars, remembering every life he couldn't save. Faces blurred together, comrades, enemies, civilians. In the silence, he whispered their names, not for forgiveness, but remembrance. Then footsteps approached behind him. It was Ro again, holding 2 mugs of steaming coffee. You're supposed to be resting, the captain said. I don't rest well, Jalen replied. Neither do I. They sat in silence for a while, the air cold and thin. Peace talks concluded an hour ago, Rose said finally. Both sides signed. The war's over. Jalen let out a long breath, half relief, half emptiness. Good. Ro hesitated. They're offering you a commission. Chief of Interspecies Medical Coordination. You could build something, help prevent another Helion. Jalen turned the mug in his hands. And if I refuse? Ro smiled faintly. Then you disappear into the dust, and the legend grows. Either way, they'll still tell stories about you. Stories lie, Jalen murmured. They forget the cost. Ro studied him for a long moment. Maybe. But sometimes, a lie like that helps others live. He stood, clapped Jalen on the shoulder, and walked away. Weeks later, the reports began to spread. In the border colonies where the war had scarred entire worlds, mysterious healers were appearing, someone who moved between ruins, carrying outdated medkits, and wearing no insignia. They refused payment, left no name, and vanished before dawn. Sometimes they arrived where plague had broken out and disappeared after the last patient recovered. Sometimes they walked onto battlefields mid-skirmish, tending to both sides, and were gone before anyone could thank them. Rumors grew like wildfire. The Reaper had returned. But those who looked closely swore the truth was gentler. He never carried a weapon again. Only bandages, syringes, and a small, battered scanner. The only mark on him was the ink across his throat, blackened by smoke and scar tissue, but still legible: medic. In time, even the children of the conquered worlds learned the story. Not of the man who killed, but of the one who healed in the ruins, who turned death's symbol into mercy's reminder.